He was called a king, but ruled like a tyrant. He held the crown, but became a symbol of national disgrace. And yet, what the world remembers him most for is what was under his royal robe. This is not just the story of a controversial monarch. This is the story of a man whose private life shook a nation, and whose royal member became a European mystery for the ages. This is the tale of Ferdinand VII of Spain, the king with the most controversial member in Europe. To understand Ferdinand VII, we must first enter the chaos of 18th century Spain, a nation exhausted, a monarchy corrupted, and a people desperate for hope. But what they got was Ferdinand. Born in 1784, he was the son of King Charles IV. A boy raised in privilege but starved of power. Ferdinand grew up bitter, watched his mother manipulated by ministers, his father ruled like a puppet, and an outsider, Manuel Godoy, pulling the strings of the crown. From the shadows, Ferdinand watched, and he waited. Spain was bleeding, Napoleon's France was on the rise, and the Spanish throne was bending under pressure. The people despised Godoy, and Ferdinand used that hatred like a dagger. He plotted, he whispered, he conspired to overthrow his own father, and in 1808, he got what he wanted. But in comes a man more cunning than Ferdinand ever imagined, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon invited Ferdinand and his father to France to negotiate. They never returned as kings. Both were forced to abdicate, and Napoleon placed his own brother Joseph Bonaparte on the throne. Spain was betrayed. The people rose up, and Ferdinand, he vanished into exile in France. While guerrilla warfare tore Spain apart, Ferdinand became a symbol, not for his courage, not for his wisdom, but because he simply wasn't French. The people called him El Deseado, the desired one. The king they never truly knew, but hoped might save them. In 1814, after Napoleon's fall, Ferdinand VII returned, and what the Spanish people got was not a savior, but a tyrant. Ferdinand abolished the liberal constitution of 1812. He imprisoned those who opposed him. He executed reformers. He ruled with iron and incompetence. Spain fell into darkness, and yet, this is not the scandal he's remembered for. Because Ferdinand's true legacy was not political, it was personal, and it began with his bedroom. Behind palace walls, whispers spread. Ferdinand had a problem, a very royal problem. He married not once, not twice, but 4 times. Each wife younger than the last, each marriage ending in failure. The king could not produce an heir. But the mystery wasn't that he was sterile. The mystery was why. Servants spoke in hushed tones, physicians made cryptic notes, foreign ambassadors wrote disturbing reports that Ferdinand's member was grotesquely large. So large, in fact, it was unusable. Let's pause here. Because the question of Ferdinand's appendage is not some tabloid rumor. It's a historical curiosity, recorded by doctors and nobles of the time. One court physician wrote, "It is monstrous in length and width, rendering his attempts at coitus painful to others and fruitless for himself." And thus began the European fascination with the king's most private feature. His third wife, Maria Josepha Amalia of Saxony, was barely 15 when they married. She was reportedly terrified of the king. The marriage was never consummated. She died young, and Ferdinand mourned little. By the time he married Maria Cristina of the Two Sicilies, Spain was in chaos again, and Ferdinand was desperate, not for power, but for an heir. By now, Ferdinand VII was aging. Bloated from years of excess, his health rapidly declining, but his obsession remained: produce an heir, no matter the cost. He turned to his 4th wife, Maria Cristina of the Two Sicilies, a young woman nearly 30 years his junior. And for the first time, something changed. Maria Cristina was clever. She understood her role wasn't just to be queen, it was to secure her husband's bloodline. And miraculously, she succeeded. In 1830, after decades of infertility, tragedy, and failure, the impossible happened. She gave birth to a daughter, Isabella VI. The palace rejoiced, but the kingdom held its breath, because Ferdinand had just rewritten the laws of succession, and in doing so, he lit the match to a civil war. Traditionally, Spain followed Salic law, which forbade women from inheriting the throne. But Ferdinand, desperate to leave his mark, changed the law. His brother, Don Carlos, had been waiting for the crown. And when Ferdinand named Isabella heir instead, Carlos declared war. The First Carlist War erupted. a bloody, brutal struggle that tore Spain apart. On one side, royalists loyal to Isabella, on the other, ultra-conservatives rallying behind Don Carlos. And while the country bled, Ferdinand decayed. Ferdinand's body was failing. Years of obesity, gout, and illness had ravaged him. His skin turned pale, his limbs swollen, and his once feared voice reduced to a rasp. But even as he lay dying, the obsession with his private anatomy persisted. Medical attendants documented unusual swelling. Autopsy notes hinted at abnormalities, and some claimed his infamous member had continued to grow unnaturally with age. Was it elephantiasis, a tumor, a birth defect? No one could agree, but the legend only grew. Foreign dignitaries gossiped about it, pamphlets mocked him. Artists in France drew obscene cartoons depicting Ferdinand as a grotesque, oversized monarch. All member, no brains. He was no longer feared. He was a joke with the crown of Spain on his head. In September of 1833, Ferdinand VII, the Desired One, took his final breath. He died bloated, bitter, and largely despised. And yet, the mystery of his body survived him. His daughter Isabella inherited the throne, but not without consequence. The Carlist Wars would rage for decades, splitting Spain across royal lines. A conflict rooted in Ferdinand's final decision. A decision that began not with law, not with politics, but with the one thing that haunted him for life, his broken body. Historians still debate it. Was Ferdinand's member truly so massive it rendered him useless? Was it a medical condition? A tragic irony of genetics? Or was it all exaggerated? A twisted political rumor designed to humiliate a failed king? One thing is clear. For all his crimes, blunders, and tyranny, Ferdinand VII is not remembered as the Desired One he once claimed to be, but as the king whose legacy was shaped by what was hidden beneath his robes. Death usually ends the story. But for Ferdinand VII, it was only the beginning. The rumors about his body didn't die with him. They grew louder, darker, and far more bizarre. Because Ferdinand's corpse became an object of fascination. When his body was prepared for burial, royal attendants reported something strange. A bulging of the lower abdomen, swelling that didn't match natural decomposition. Some whispered it was grotesque. Others couldn't look at it. Then came the unconfirmed reports that doctors had preserved part of his anatomy in secret. Yes, that part. Why? Because what had once embarrassed the court had now become a medical curiosity. In the 1800s, Europe was entering a strange new age, the era of the anatomical museum. Doctors, collectors, and royal archivists were fascinated by freaks of nature. Human oddities, preserved organs, deformities in jars. There were even whispers that Ferdinand's infamous member was removed, preserved in formaldehyde, and displayed privately for decades. Was it true? We may never know, because records from that period were mysteriously lost, burned, or buried deep within royal vaults. But what we do have are the second-hand accounts. A 19th-century French surgeon who claimed to have seen it himself. An Austrian ambassador who wrote home describing it as inhuman in scale. And a British noblewoman who joked that Ferdinand could have fathered a horse had the angle allowed. While other kings were remembered for conquests, diplomacy, reform, Ferdinand was remembered for dysfunction. In every sense. His foreign policy, a disaster. His legacy, a fractured, war-torn nation. His myth, a king ruled by his own grotesque biology. Even modern historians struggle with him. Not because of the lack of documents, but because so much of what survives sounds too absurd to be real. Some believe Ferdinand suffered from macrogenitosomia, a rare condition causing abnormal growth of genital tissue. Others suggest lymphedema, a result of chronic gout and poor circulation. One theory even claims he had a teratoma, a tumor that mimics human tissue, causing parts of the body to grow erratically. And then, there are those who believe it was all propaganda. A calculated smear by liberal enemies who wanted to mock a king they could not defeat in court. So they defeated him in memory instead. Spain's liberal press had every reason to humiliate Ferdinand. He had silenced them, imprisoned them, executed their heroes. And now, they had the last laugh. The idea that Ferdinand was too large to function, too cursed by his own body to perform the most basic duty of a king, became the most poetic punishment history could give. To this day, no confirmed artifact of Ferdinand's anatomy has surfaced, but the myth lives on. Scholars still debate it. Writers still joke about it, and the story of the king with the most controversial member in Europe continues to echo across time. Equal parts tragedy, comedy, and medical mystery. In the end, Ferdinand VII ruled a kingdom, but was ruled by shame, by gossip, by a body that betrayed him. His people once called him El Deseado, the desired one. But history? History remembers him as something else entirely. The king whose legacy didn't lie in his crown, but in a secret no throne could hide. Decades have passed, the wars are over, the crown passed from hand to hand, but Ferdinand VII was never forgotten. Not for heroism, not for greatness, but for something far stranger, something shameful. A royal mystery that became his legacy. In France, England, Austria, Ferdinand became a joke. The once feared Spanish monarch was now the punchline in court gossip, the caricature in political cartoons. While Europe remembered Napoleon for brilliance and George III for madness, Ferdinand VII was remembered for an oversized, unusable legacy. His private parts were no longer private. They were part of history. And in whispers, one tale survived, that somewhere in a sealed glass jar, behind a velvet curtain in a private European collection, the infamous royal member still exists. A preserved specimen, a grotesque relic. A king's legacy floating in formaldehyde. No proof, no photos, just whispers. But those whispers refuse to fade. Today, Ferdinand VII is a subject of scholarly discomfort. His reign is described as brutal, his policies regressive, his leadership disastrous, but no textbook dares to open with what people really remember. That Spain was once ruled by a man so grotesquely malformed below the waist that he became a medical legend. A man whose very body symbolized the failure of a nation to produce anything healthy. Not heirs, not peace, not progress. His daughter Isabella never escaped the curse of his decisions. Civil war followed her. Public hatred grew, and all of it began because Ferdinand refused to let his brother succeed him, and instead created a power vacuum, out of sheer desperation to pass on a name. But what he truly passed on was a broken country, and an eternal rumor. Ferdinand lies buried in Spain's royal pantheon among kings who conquered, ruled, and shaped history. But unlike them, his story lives on not in glory, but in gossip. A monarch whose body made him a prisoner, whose desperation made him a villain, and whose mystery made him immortal. Was it real, or just a cruel myth? We may never know, but one truth remains. In the long history of kings and crowns, no one was ever remembered quite like Ferdinand VI. Not for his mind, not for his heart, but for the one thing he could never rule over, his own body.